Let's talk women. Starts with Wei Li versus Rose, but then you got Valentina and Andrade, and they're really in the spotlight. And when you have Wei Li, we just haven't seen enough of her, right? She's still a little bit new, but she was one half of one of the greatest fights in the history of the sport. Of course, I'm talking about Wei Li versus Joanna. And even though that's been a period of time, and even though we haven't been overwhelmed with her, we were still able to see things in the championship rounds. We're able to see a grit and a toughness from a young lady who left her country, had nobody in the arena cheering her name, but was able to stay focused anyway and go out and win a world championship. I don't know if we've ever drawn a larger conclusion or learned more about somebody in such a short period of time as we have with Wei Li. And 115 pounds seems to be the perfect weight for her, but Wei Li is now talking about she wants to take on the Bullet. And I don't know what happened between those girls. But I mean, this was oil and water from Jump Street. Wei Li and the Bullet, right from the jump, it just didn't work. They just weren't going to get along. Now, the fact that the Bullet is on the card, they're going to have press conferences, and they're going to be in a bubble, and they're going to be around each other, and they're going to have media opportunities, and let's say they both get a win. I'm just saying, and I'm foreshadowing for you a little bit, but I have a feeling whatever this is between Wei Li and the Bullet is not over. It might have died off for about 5 or 6 or even 7 months. I suggest for you that if that wick gets relit, don't be surprised, and hopefully some reporter that's covering us will ask us, what's the genesis of this? And as willing as I'm sure Wei Li is to go up to 125 pounds, she is not. She's meant for 115. It's a height issue. She's just meant for 115. The Bullet can't pull off of 125. So before anybody gets too excited, we're going to have to figure out a weight class. It also seems as though before we start talking about Wei Li and the Bullet, you got a big problem in front of your Wei Li, which is Thug Rose. And Rose has always been respected, and Rose has always been appreciated. But after Rose became the world champion and then came out and defended it against Joanna a second time, I think that's when everybody turned their heads. I just remind you of that because it seems like a period of time ago, and some of you have forgot. Some of us have forgot that Rose has showed an ability not only to go on the ground, but to go on her feet. But Rose shows a different ability to go with somebody she's stronger than and that's stronger than her. You have to consider that part because Wei Li is very powerful. Wei Li is very, very strong for 115 pounds. I would only submit for you that Rose doesn't make 115 without a lot of sweat, a lot of discipline, and a lot of heartache as well. Rose is big for that weight class, but Rose is a little taller, so sometimes it's hard to see her strength. Rose also understands leverage. Rose also isn't going to be surprised when she's hit and feels some of that power. Now, I bring that to you because Wei Li's the favorite. I agree with that. I think Wei Li should be the favorite. I also think that there's a disrespect there in everything we've seen Rose go out, try to do, and achieve successfully versus the limited amount we've seen of Wei Li, but it was all successful. I think that there's a little bit of disrespect and a little bit of recency bias. And I think that Rose, if anything, is going to come out and remind us why she's here. I mean, right? Rose either shows us she's the best in the world or she shows us she's the second best in the world. It's kind of hard to lose in a world title fight, right? It's kind of hard to lose. Maybe you don't get what you wanted, but you've still proven something very special. I think if Wei Li starts looking past Rose as many other have, if she starts this dialogue back up with the Bullet, I'd love to see where that's going to go. But I also think that Rose needs to be given this opportunity, and then we need to hear from Joanna. And Joanna's been oddly quiet as of late. Joanna did one interview at one point, and she said, call me when it's for a world title fight. Now, I don't know how serious she was, and I have friends that are in that room. They say she's in there every day working her ass off. Everybody I talk to about Joanna Champion only say how focused and dedicated she is. And I'll even ask a follow-up question sometimes, like, well, what weight is she looking to come back at? And that's the one thing that's where they get jammed. They'll go, Chael, I don't know. So Joanna's one, she'll go either weight class where the opportunity is, but we do need to hear from her. But don't miss out on Wei Li. Something special is going on. Oh, by the way, Thug Rose is about to return. And then you got Andrade is going to be coming through the curtain. Now, the reason Andrade becomes interesting, a lot of it is because of a physicality. Generally, we're talking about who's got the speed, who's quicker, who's got the better combos. It's very rare that we would give an analysis and talk about strength. As a matter of fact, in my entire career, I can only remember doing that one time, and it had to do with Volkanovski. Volkanovski, who used to be a 96 kilogram, which is 211 pounds, rugby player, cuts down to 145. And I remember giving an analysis of Volkanovski and catching myself partway through and going, you know what? I have never put physical strength in one of my reasons favoring the fighter that I'm picking to win. But it was very real with Volkanovski, particularly when you have the backstory of the 96 kilograms, the sport of rugby. It was very real of what a muscle shark he is. And even Chad Mendes came out. Chad Mendes is a big muscle shark too. And he said, man, this guy's a strong guy. So when you start talking about the Bullet, who is as good of an MMA fighter as you're going to find, hard stop. You don't have to bring in genders. You don't have to bring in weight classes. The Bullet is as good of an MMA fighter as you're going to find. When you bring in the physicality of Andrade, okay, and I don't know that Andrade's physicality carries over late in the fight into championship rounds, but I don't know that it needs to. I can remember a guy that I used to have to deal with, Vitor Belfort, and Vitor Belfort was not built for 22 and 25-minute fights, but he didn't usually need to. Vitor would bring a storm, look around, and there was usually no trees left standing before he ever got to that point. I think that that's something that Andrade brings, but I also think it's why Andrade is here. I think that's why she is meaningful. I think that if Andrade is not grabbing moments and or rounds prior to the third, we likely already have our outcome. Things aren't going to get better for her. But it is very unique. And when you have somebody like the Bullet, you start to break them down slowly. You have to sit and study them slowly. Different gyms, different trainers, different coaches, different athletes all over the world. They start to study you in pieces. I can remember the great boxing fights that you used to watch on a transistor radio. And then they had something called closed captioning, turned into closed circuit, turned into pay-per-view, just by example. But once the video opened up, and now you got everybody who's got a phone, has a camera, you can start to study things. And these long 10 years undefeated, or 10 years as heavyweight champion, or 19 knockouts in a row. You don't keep hearing of those things. And people think it's because the sport has changed or the athletes have caught up or training has changed. It's none of those things. It's because of technology. The heavyweight champion, all you knew about him is what you heard on the transistor radio, even if you were a foe, even if you were a meaningful contender or opponent. In a worldwide sport, if you couldn't be in the geographical location where that guy was competing, you didn't get to see him. You didn't know what the tendencies were. You didn't know what to watch for. You didn't want to look out for. When you have somebody as good as Valentina, it's very tough to identify not only who can beat her, but how. How are we going to beat her? What appears to be the blueprint? What appears to be the spots within that cage that you can do your finest moments in? We don't know those things yet. So in many ways, it's all a story to get to the end. And in many ways, every time Valentina goes out there and competes, these different coaches and these different trainers with these different young athletes, some of which are 12 and 13 and 14-year-old, right? In many ways, you would be safer to bet the person to beat Valentina is likely an 8th grader right now. They're likely a freshman in high school, the person that's going to come along. It's going to take them that much time. But each time she walks out, each time she doesn't show something new, each time she gets held in the same position, of which I haven't identified yet, but it's also not my job. And these are the things that you need to start to look for. And the big question for Valentina, as it has to do with Andrade, is does an overwhelming strength play a part in the possible kryptonite of the Bullet?